Hello and welcome to HackerRank's Remote Hiring Masterclass. My name is Adil Bandukwala. I'm stoked to be bringing this to you today live from Bangalore, India. This Remote Hiring Masterclass is brought to you by HackerRank, the developer skills company that is widely known as the standard for assessing developer skills for over 2,000 plus companies across the world. HackerRank is backed by GMI Equity, Khosla Ventures, Battery Ventures, and Y Combinator, and has offices in Mountain View, London, and Bangalore. I'm really excited about having all of you on the webinar today. When I looked at the attendee list, I'm pleasantly surprised to see over 196 of you already log in. In India, we normally say that people log in 10 to 15 minutes later, but this is so refreshing to see that we've got over 196 people already logged in to the webinar. And as I speak, that number just refreshed to 206 people. So this is fantastic. I also see a lot of familiar friends and faces on the webinar, which is fantastic to see. So I see Savita, who runs recruiting at ThoughtWorks, is here. Abhishek Mathur from Publicis Sapient is here. We've got Priya from Atlassian. Sunita, who's a really good friend at Walmart Labs India, is here. Shishir, who's from Deloitte, is here. Thank you, guys. Thank you, all of us, for joining in. We really appreciate that you made time for this today. We also have AK Menon, who's from Options Executive Search, a very well-known face in the fraternity. AK, thanks for making the call. And then we've also got Indrani from HCL and Divya from Deloitte as well. So let me quickly walk you through what the agenda for today is for our webinar. So what we're going to do is we'll start off by looking at the evolution of remote working and the rapid rise of remote hiring, followed by insights on all things remote hiring by our guest speakers for today. We'll also have a live Q&A, but we'll reserve this towards the end of this particular webinar. Please do submit your questions using the Q&A box that you see on your screen. As and when you get a question, please key them in on that inbox. We'll be looking at those questions, and we'll take those questions towards the end of the webinar. All right. With that set as the agenda, let me get started by introducing our speakers for the day. I'm delighted to have with us Manmeet Sandhu, who is Chief People Officer of PhonePe, the digital transactions platform anchored on payments. Manmeet joined PhonePe in December 2018 to support the org's goal of scaling leadership to keep pace with its exponential growth. She's currently focused on building out a world-class HR organization with the right tools and systems to PhonePe employees who can access these opportunities to be the best versions of themselves. Prior to PhonePe, Manmeet was at Amazon Seattle supporting the Prime Video worldwide marketing team. She has about 15 years of experience in HR across multiple countries and in areas such as compensation, diversity and inclusion, and business partnering. I've known Manmeet for a little over a year now, and she's someone I've really cherished conversing with over the last year. Manmeet, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm delighted to host you.
Thanks, Adil. Pleasure to be here.
All right, my next guest is Sudeep Ralan, who is Vice President People at Walmart Labs India. Sudeep is responsible for driving the people agenda for the fast-growing, technically proficient, and innovative workforce at Walmart Labs India's delivery center. From acquiring to retaining to developing talent, Sudeep leads cross-functional HR teams whose role is as much about immediate delivery as it is about building the organization of the future. Sudeep has nearly 17 years of experience across the IT, BPO, and FMCG industries in a diverse set of roles spanning multiple geographies. Prior to joining Walmart Labs India, he has played strategic leadership roles with organizations such as GSK Consumer Healthcare and Accenture. I first met Sudeep about 2 years back, and ever since have always trusted his counsel and expertise. He's someone that I often go to for advice on life-altering matters, if I may, and is someone that I've always looked up to. Sudeep, again, thanks so much for joining in today. I really appreciate you making time.
Thank you, Adil. That's very kind.
All right, with that then, let's get started with our webinar. And let me, to start this webinar, take a look at the evolution of remote hiring. You know, remote hiring first, remote working really, first came to light in the 1990s, largely to retain the services of mothers who preferred not to commute or who wanted to work part-time. But as technology evolved, companies such as IBM introduced remote working for across functions, across geographies. And around 2015, particularly in India, the APAC region, thanks to broadband, the advent of the internet, cloud computing, and a burgeoning demand for online collaboration tools, many more jobs started moving remote. Come 2020, due to COVID-19, every major business was forced to embrace virtual or remote work as health and safety today become a top priority. Going forward, firms are quickly putting together business continuity and contingency plans in place to ensure that they're prepared in the near future. And as a result, they're moving all their processes remote as well as virtual. Remote hiring particularly isn't necessarily a new phenomenon. If you think about HackerRank's customers like Amazon, Atlassian, Bloomberg, D. Shaw, IBM, Facebook, all have been hiring remote for quite some time now. And if you look at it, these companies, particularly in India, continue to hire and at different places across the world. Now, with that as broader context, I'd love to get started with my first question. Most enterprises across APAC have always had a predominantly in-person focused recruiting strategy, if you all look at it. My first question really is, how do companies adjust as the world shifts from in-person to remote hiring? And I'd love to start with Manmeet, if that's okay. Manmeet, how would companies go about approaching hiring given COVID-19?
Yeah, it's something that I spend quite a lot of time thinking about. In my experience, what has happened is that as the process of recruitment has become more structured, more formalized, more focused on getting the right data and objective inputs in, they have also then been able to move to something that is online much more easily. Because you are looking at much more concrete points of inputs, it's made it easier for businesses to then think about how to just transfer the process to a much more online sort of a version. I think the tech organizations are a little bit ahead on that one, especially since your starting point over there is a very, very highly objective process. We are testing for capabilities and skill sets. And moving that to an asynchronous process, which sort of gets taken care of individually between the recruiter and the interviewee, simplifies that process significantly. And once you have that data, moving on to the more nuanced aspects that are less objective into later stages of the process is easier to manage. And what you is much, much more concrete data points that you can transfer into specific inputs much more easily. So in my experience, the more you're able to make your process standardized and systematic, where you're very, very clear about what is it that you want out of the process, the easier it is for you to then to switch to an online module where you don't necessarily need a lot of your instinctive reactions, which may or may not be correct, as we all know, and can go a lot more by database decision making. So that is what my advice would be, that if you can formalize your process, if you can make it more objective, the likelihood of moving to something that is online and does not require in-person interactions is a lot more easier.
Well, makes a lot of sense. Manmeet, thanks so much for that. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that standardization is absolutely key, because it's very important that we standardize not only the skills that we're hiring, but also critical pieces like interview or feedback. Because when all of these elements come together, I think that is when you get like a fabulous enterprise-facing organization. So completely agree with you. And I wanted to refer what you said and draw learning that I similarly had when I recently read this quote from Bill Gates. And when he talked about this quote, he said that competition to hire the best will increase in the years ahead, and companies that give extra flexibility to the employees will have an edge in this era. And therefore, companies need to go beyond conventional means to engage top talent. And like you said, it's about standardizing elements of the hiring process so that we can go ahead and deliver that best-in-class experience, not only to hiring managers, but also candidates, because we're in a tri-sided marketplace from a talent perspective. With that, I'd love to go to my next question. And my next question is for Sudeep. Sudeep, what signals should companies be watching before pulling the trigger on switching to remote hiring? You know, you just can't overnight switch the trigger to remote hiring, because you've got to have systems set up, you've got to have processes set up, you've got to have hiring managers and candidates educated about what this is going to be like, because this is a new world reality. So what should companies be actually watching for before pulling the trigger on remote hiring?
Well, I think you kind of answered your question yourself, Adil. And I think, firstly, like you said, it's not as if remote hiring is a completely new phenomenon, right? I mean, most progressive organizations across industries have, built-in remote hiring processes to a certain extent, in some cases to a much larger extent, in some cases lesser. But to some extent, they're all halfway there or a little more than that. And I think recently the kind of situation that we faced with the pandemic and the lockdown, a lot of companies didn't really necessarily have the choice to think this through. So I think some of this is possibly retrospective in a way when we think about it. But obviously the tech infrastructure and the ability to deliver a consistent positive experience to both our hiring managers as well as our candidates is possibly the first assessment that we need to make. The second is also a bit of a cultural readiness, right? And by that, what I mean is the intent has to be there. Our internal interviewers, hiring managers, the recruiters, they need to be comfortable enough that they can succeed, with a slightly or with a completely new process. And if that means that you need to take an additional week or 10 days or 3 weeks to familiarize people with new tools and new ways of working, soothe some of their apprehensions and address some of their questions and concerns, I think it's worth kind of doing that. The third bit is obviously around security, right? I mean, the more of remote hiring that you do, there's a lot more data out there, there's a lot more information flow out there. So how do you make sure that your infrastructure is set up to support security on both ends of the spectrum, on the candidate side as well as the organization side? And the last one I would say is probably a little broader as well, right? I think to kind of take on from what you mentioned earlier and what Manmeet was talking about when we spoke about hiring given the current situation, right? While companies do need to pivot quickly and need to make sure that they are building capacity and capability for their organizations as quickly as they can, you also need to take the time out and make sure that you stay true to your core. There are certain strengths that each company brings. There are certain things that each organization is known for. And it would be wise to not, reject that completely and make sure that we move in a direction where we are pivoting, we are being agile, but at the same time, retaining the core sense of what you are and retaining your values. So I think these are the 3 or 4 sort of checkpoints that I would urge any recruiting leader or professional to sort of think about before you, like you said, switch to a remote hiring process completely.
Thanks a lot for that, Sudeep. I really, really resonated with a couple of points that you made. The first one being, taking time to familiarize people with the process is like a big learning for me. 2, I think staying true to your core and your culture, I think that can really bring out such a lot of emotion, which can be rooted into the process. Because, often when we look at our processes, it's very important to weave in emotions, and your emotions will really come from the heart of your culture. And, true to your role, you've spoken about exactly what the process and culture and the emotions should be like. So I'm glad, you were able to capture that for us. So our view at HackerRank, Sudeep, has really been that from a technical hiring perspective, companies should really be able to focus on 3 core attributes so that they can thrive in tech hiring. The first one is being able to deliver a developer-friendly interview experience from anywhere, so that hiring managers have the freedom to do interviews wherever they want, and candidates have the ability to express themselves in a language and platform that they are really comfortable in, because it's really about making people comfortable. I often quote this example to my colleagues where when we send our kids for exams, do we actually prepare them or we send them just ad hoc? Most parents will prepare and prepare like nuts. Yet from an interview perspective, how many recruiters actually go out there and prepare candidates? So it's very important to prepare candidates and give them an environment that they're really familiar and comfortable with so that they can express themselves in a platform of their choice. Two, we need to build a remote hiring process that we can trust. Trust from a recruiting perspective, from a hiring manager perspective, and from a candidate perspective. And lastly, have the ability to assess advanced developer skills from anywhere. And this is more rooted towards the hiring managers, where they should be able to figure out, are these the skills that I really want? And am I hiring for skills or am I hiring for pedigree? And in this age, it's very important that we actually hire for skills. All right, with that, let me get on to my next question. And for this question, let's stay with Sudeep. Sudeep, how do companies actually go about ensuring they deliver a developer-friendly candidate experience and do that at scale across geos, across different tech platforms, across different languages?
I mean, a lot of operative words there, right? Developer-friendly, candidate experience, and scale, right? So I think if we need to take a look at this holistically, I think it boils down to 3 or 4 things. The first is what you had mentioned earlier, the ability to retain a degree of personal connect and relationships through the process. Second is obviously the robustness and the scalability of the tools that you use. The third is the interviewer capability. And I think that's a huge part of the process. And the fourth one is the actual tracking and reporting of the experience itself. So, the first one we spoke about, right, which is on making sure that all our hiring managers and our recruiters are really not letting go of the core values and the focus on relationships, right, even as you're doing it remotely. But I think importantly enough, the tech tools and the infrastructure is something that all companies are and should be investing in. For us, for example, we have an online code pairing platform that we are using. We are using virtual meeting rooms and whiteboarding capabilities to help our recruiters and managers. We're also leveraging a lot more of social media platforms than we were doing earlier, even as we are reaching out to larger talent pools and we continue to build relationships with a much larger talent pool. So I think these things really help you to maintain not just a candidate or a developer-friendly experience, but even a friendly experience with the talent overall. And then, like I said, it's really important to continue to track and report. So we do have regular monthly surveys being run with our candidate experience, our new joiner experience, and our hiring manager experience. And it's actually interesting to see and compare the pre and post lockdown experiences, right? So whether it be through the survey or anecdotally, because behaviors are changing, the external circumstances are very different, and you need to remain cognizant of that. And the last one is, like I said, is around interviewer capability itself. How do you make sure that our interviewers are ready in a new environment, not only familiar with the regular hiring processes, but also familiar with the do's and don'ts and principles of trying to assess people in a much more different way, especially for more senior profiles and leadership profiles. So how do you kind of make that? I think if we do these 3 or 4 things consistently and track and report experience internally to people and holding up a mirror, I think all of it does ensure that we are delivering like you said, a developer-friendly experience at scale because of the tools. Does that help?
Absolutely, it does. It does. So, to echo what you said, important for companies to invest in platforms, tools, and technologies to ensure both a hiring manager and developer-friendly experience, because these are new processes for both. And it's not just candidate preparation. Preparing interviewers in this new environment is equally important, because we're looking at a two-sided marketplace. So thanks, Sudeep, for kind of sharing that. Let me also share with you what our learning from HackerRank is. When we look at today's advancement in technology and assessments, we're increasingly seeing customers like Atlassian, Bloomberg, VMware, GoDaddy, Snap, and more that are evaluating candidates' problem solving, system design, and technical communication skills with code pairing sessions like Sudeep mentioned. And this happens with real-time pair programming. And what this enables these firms, forward-looking firms, to do is discuss potential architecture refinements in real time. It also helps them evaluate a candidate's ability to collaborate and communicate from a technical perspective. It helps recreate interviews on demand with key-by-key playback. The entire team can review because code and code quality and optimization are very, very important when hiring developers. And lastly, it also helps capture really consistent feedback on all required skills. The next thing that we've also seen people do is that they're leveraging virtual whiteboarding and forward-thinking capabilities like virtual whiteboarding to define a standard skill rubric to keep all interviewers focused on the right skills. They're assessing advanced system design skills on virtual whiteboards, and they're actually ranking candidates against a standard set of skills each step of the way. So it's really, really amazing for me to kind of get this perspective, how the world is changing from an all things technical hiring perspective. You know, I was just looking at the questions box, and I'm so glad that a lot of questions are coming in. We already have questions from Seema from Walmart Labs. We've got Omdat from HCL. We've got Gandhi Alagirish and Himanshu Sharma as well put in their questions. Please do continue sending your questions. We are looking at them. We are monitoring them. It's just that we'll take them towards the end of the webinar so that we cover all the content that we've planned for you. And let me quickly look at the attendees as well. I noticed that we've just crossed 305 people who've joined us for the webinar. Again, brilliant turnout. Thank you so much to all of you. Let's go forward with the next section of our webinar. For this, let's come to Manmeet. Manmeet, tell us a little bit about the kind of tech talent your company is looking to hiring today, and what really is your modus operandi when it comes to engaging and getting this talent on board.
Sure, yeah. Hiring tech talent continues to be one of the most challenging things that we are working on at PhonePe. Requirements are across the organization. We are looking for full stack developers. We are looking at developers with capabilities across mobile, iOS as well as Android. We are looking for a bunch of product managers with strong technical capabilities, engineering managers, a couple of senior roles at the architect level as well. Fairly diverse set of skills, but essentially what we look at when we look at our technical talent is really for them to be able to convey strong fundamentals, curiosity about the business. So very important that they have a focus on developing solutions that are focused on solving their business problems, as well as the ability to think holistically about the various issues and therefore develop systems that can scale as the organization continues to scale. So for us, really, people who can think deeply about the problem statement and use their fairly deep functional capabilities to help grow and develop the organization is fairly important. We are about 3.5, 4 years old as an organization, so a lot of the core systems are still in the process of being designed. So therefore, continue to look for people who can take that challenge on and deliver on it. Your second part of the question, in terms of how do we sort of try to make sure that we are continuing to focus on these specific set of interviewers or a specific set of software engineers, is really by just making sure that the amount of work that is going on at PhonePe is actively shared. We have a bunch of blog posts and a very active blog site maintained by the CTO, Rahul, that talks about some of the ongoing challenges and the solutions that we are looking at, as well as the approaches that we have to engineering as a whole. We are also fairly active on a bunch of social media sites where we communicate what the core problems that we are solving for and how we are looking at solutions there. In addition, through the course of the last year, we have run a bunch of hackathons. We have shared the challenges that we are working on, shared the kind of problems and profiles that we have currently in the organization to help people understand what it takes to be successful at PhonePe. So we are better at being able to attract people who align culturally with the kind of organization that we are building.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Manmeet. Rahul for sure is a rock star and is legendary, if I may, in the developer community, specifically from a Bangalore and India perspective. And the entire community looks up to him a lot, and rightly so, for whatever he's done. And we've often seen that there's great content coming from him. He's always engaging with the community, which is fantastic to see. As it is familiar with a lot of the other enterprising leaders that are coming out of the India ecosystem. So thanks for sharing that, Manmeet. Manmeet, given that you just mentioned all the kind of diverse roles that you're actually hiring for, and given that talent is really, really scattered across different places today, it becomes imperative to define and assess a standard set of skills consistently and evaluate them systematically throughout the hiring process. What, according to you, are key components of a trusted remote hiring process?
So I think a bunch of stuff we've already talked about. At this point in time, I think it does switch considerably to being able to offer two things to the engineer interviewing. One, the fact that there is a personal relationship where they are kept informed of the process, they are given context about the organization, and they're able to see how they would fit into it, getting an understanding of the culture, getting an understanding of the systems of the organization, getting to know the hiring managers, the recruiters, various other people involved in the entire process. And the second part of it is being able to be clear about what they are being evaluated for, and being communicated the specificity and the objectivity of the process very, very clearly. The first part of it we manage by making sure that they have a couple of very clearly defined contact points who they're working with, who are engaging with them on an ongoing basis. Hiring managers spend a lot of time, especially towards the latter part of the process, to make sure that there is key awareness on making sure they have the context and they have an understanding of how PhonePe operates. The second part of it is leveraging various different systems. Again, we've spoken about them in terms of virtual onboarding, code pairing, virtual whiteboarding, code pairing, etc., as means of being able to assess standardized set of skills across the various engineering roles, so that the feedback is consistent. The third part of it that we do along with the same process is that we make sure that there is a very systematic debriefing process that is also followed, where all of the inputs being received are evaluated within a small group of people who've been involved in that specific hiring process and are able to calibrate across each other to make sure that even while the inputs are objective, they're also being evaluated using the same set of standards and evaluation processes. Does that answer your question?
Yes. It does. Yeah. Thank you, Manmeet. Like you said, Manmeet, leveraging integrated tools like virtual whiteboarding, code pairing, just put a lot of hiring managers and developers at ease, because these are tools that they're comfortable with, and these are platforms that they like talking about, and this is stuff that they do every day. So it just helps them. And it becomes a much more friendly experience both for hiring managers and developers. But I really like the part where you talked about the systematic debriefing process. And that is something that we are also seeing. And let me talk about exactly that on my next slide. In today's world, we're seeing best-in-class companies are assessing role-specific skills through real-world challenges that simulate day-to-day work and get a true sense of what a candidate is capable of doing. They're going all out to deliver developer-friendly candidate experiences and enabling candidates with a Docker-contained backend, a developer-friendly environment with support for multiple files, the ability to debug, autocomplete, the ability to lint, the ability to have Git integration. and more to complete projects, right within your browser with no file upload or download hassles. This really ensures that the candidates are able to demonstrate skills that they're really great at. And if you look at the remote hiring process on the slide that we're actually talking about, the team interview part, this is where a lot of debriefing happens, and that's exactly what Manmeet spoke about. Having a systematic debrief where people are able to consistently capture feedback on skills and consistent parameters, which is qualitative and quantitative in nature, so that you have alignment in real time. So with that, let's move to my next question, and let's move to Sudeep. Sudeep, when product managers work on a product launch, they put a user journey framework in place. Similarly, in the world of enterprise sales, there's a buyer behavior journey framework, which is considered very sacred when you're starting to put an enterprise sales team together to go ahead and win accounts, to win territories, and to win markets. From a hiring perspective, I'd love to understand, if we were to imagine a remote hiring candidate journey framework, what would that really look like?
So Adil, this is one of my favorite topics, right? I consistently believe that I think the people and talent acquisition teams really need to start thinking of themselves as marketeers and thinking of our talent as customers. And therefore, really thinking about, like you said, a complete customer framework and a journey that you do. And that's what we have done. We have mapped out the entire life cycle, starting from, say, a passive talent pool to a more active candidate pool, to people who are joining up fresh, to performance, to learning, etc. And we've looked at the touch points for each of them to say, what are our existing processes, our existing tools and existing programs, and what needs to get tweaked to really cater to a new environment. And I'm not just talking about the remote hiring bit, right? I mean, that's just a process. But like I keep, thinking about, this is a complete change of environment for everyone. So for example, you have to take into account the fact that people are in a lockdown, and how does that change, for want of a better word, consumer behavior, right? Because these are consumers and customers. So how does that change behavior? So we have done, we have mapped this entire journey out. You look at the processes, tools, and then each of them you assess and say, is this still applicable? Is it not applicable anymore? If it's not applicable anymore, then what do you do instead? Do you get rid of that step or that touch point altogether? Or do you replace it with a new program or a process that will take into account, the new reality? And then the third decision point comes later to say, is this going to be only for now? Or is it going to be for later as well? And I think that's where a lot of our learning has been as well. I mean, whether you look at a hiring process or our onboarding and induction process, or even learning and training, we've realized that even if things were to get back to quote unquote normal in some way, right, and people get back into offices, a lot of these new processes, a lot of these new solutions that we've created might actually stand the test of time and change the way we work and respond to our candidates and our associates for the long term. But that's really how we are thinking about it. And we're doing it as an iterative process because the world is changing so fast. We did a first cut of this in the first and second week of March when the process just started and the changes took place, and a lot of them caught us by surprise. We're doing a second iteration now in the second week of May, and re-looking at this entire process and thinking about the next 3 months. And I'm guessing that's the agility that all HR and talent acquisition people will need to bring to the table, because it's not about doing this mapping once and then creating a solution or creating a framework and then staying with it. The situation is changing so quickly that every couple of months you have to go back to the drawing board and have to map this out all over again, keeping in mind the new realities externally. Does it answer your question?
Oh, absolutely, Sudeep. I was just thinking about, mapping different hiring journey touch points, which is phases of the interview process, breaking them up, and then mapping emotions to them, and then mapping them across time intervals. When you have that three-dimensional view, it can be just amazing to see. And I'd love to come meet you when all this COVID-19 situation is over so that we can actually look at what you've put in place at Walmart Labs, because this is something that is really, really fascinating to me. So thank you for sharing that, Sudeep. I'd also thought it would be nice to share with our audience a little bit about what you spoke about earlier and what Manmeet spoke about recently in her last point, that it's very important for interviewers to update scorecards and be systematic in their assessment process, simply because, often we've seen that people used to have subjective questions in interviews, but that has now completely moved to role-based assessments. Instead of asking, can you code in JavaScript? People are now saying, on code pairing, can we actually go ahead and see if you can build an app in React.js? And therefore, when the person is actually building an app on React.js, they can actually go ahead and score people on parameters like code quality. They can score people on parameters like problem solving, on their technical language proficiency, on their technical communication. Therefore, you're actually able to standardize interviewer feedback so that, one, this is not just good for your organization, but then your recruiters can actually go back to candidates and give them legit feedback, as in, you did this really well, or you really need to improve, because often we're not able to give great feedback to recruiters simply because we don't have them. And if we're able to standardize interviewer scorecards based on skill, then you'll actually be able to do that and give feedback to the candidates, which means candidates trust your brand so much more. And this really ties into what Steve Jobs said. He said that the secret of his success is that he's always gone to exceptional lengths to hire the best people in the world. And I think we absolutely need to respect that, especially in today's age where we talk about, this concept called the war for talent. And a couple of years back when I met Josh Bursin, he actually told me, Adil, there is no war for talent. And I asked him, what do you mean there's no war for talent? People are like fighting tooth and nail for talent. And he says, Adil, the war for talent is over. The talent won. And I couldn't think about how profound that is, because it is a candidate-centric marketplace. Therefore, we need to do whatever it takes to ensure that the candidates are really having a great experience. With that, I wanted to check if we could take a few questions. I do have another question with me that I'd like to ask both Sudeep and Manmeet, but given that the audience is sending us tons of questions, I thought we'll go ahead and take a few. The first one is from Ramakrishna from Deloitte. And his question is, with the current change in technology landscape, most of our businesses in the digital space will try to drive disruption amongst this ecosystem. Which of these technologies play a critical role in the forthcoming days? He's really asking a business question where, could cloud and cognitive tech still remain, but are there any more that you think will add to the forefront? So this is a business question, Sudeep and Manmeet. While cloud and cognitive tech, according to Ramakrishna from Deloitte, will continue to remain core to a lot of businesses, are there more technologies that you think will come to the forefront? What are your thoughts? Let's start with Manmeet, if that's okay.
Sure. I tend to think about this a little differently. There are, of course, new technologies that are coming in. We are getting to be more and more focused on anything that helps us process very large amounts of data at scale, to be able to take decisions around emergent systems. There is talk around chaos computing. But in my experience across all of these years looking for talent, it's not really so much about cloud computing, cognitive tech, what have you, but tends to be a lot more on what are the core capabilities and skill sets the individual has. If you are fundamentally good at problem solving, if what you've learned about the fundamentals of coding remains, if you understand how to design holistic solutions, if you have a focus on being able to think about what the consumer might want, and how you can make sure that you're creating scalable systems that can stand the test of time, then regardless of the specific tool, the specific skill set that you might be using, you're going to be able to continue to deliver great value to the organization. So yes, there are a bunch of things that are coming in. We continue to care about that. But as a as an engineer or as an organization, my focus would be on making sure that I'm getting people in who understand fundamentals really, really well, because getting them to understand a new technology is going to be really easy once I have that.
Got it. Sudeep, you have any thoughts on this? Sudeep,
hey, sorry, it took me a while to unmute. Yeah, sorry,
Sure.
It took me a while to unmute. No, I think I would echo what Manmeet said from a candidate point of view and from a talent point of view. I also feel that it's important to keep track of the evolving technology landscape, particularly now when, which suddenly there seems to be a little bit of a, for want of a better word, a shift in the power landscape globally, right? And you see the prominence and of the tech companies and how they are really, come to the forefront right now. And therefore, like we've been seeing, this has forced the digital acceleration of most organizations. So I think it's important to keep an eye out on the technology landscape. Cloud computing obviously is going to be the future. Cognitive tech, a lot of work being done. AI, on VR, which I think is definitely going to get accelerated. So I think a lot of our talent should be looking at getting skilled in these areas and getting exposure in these areas to be successful for the future. But having said that, I don't think there is any need right now to suddenly panic or jump ships, right, immediately. Change is sometimes gradual, and gradual change is good. And I think if you continue to focus on what companies are looking for, and if you're part of good companies, then you are also part of the reskilling programs. It should be okay to see and observe the changes and then kind of decide career options. I'm just sort of extrapolating the question a bit, Adil, because I can sense that from a talent perspective, this is an important thing to think about.
Absolutely. No, I think very, very well said, Sudeep and Manmeet, with the points that you made. I'm itching to get to the next question, Sudeep and Manmeet, because this is a really fun question. And I think it will put us on the spot and it will make a lot of us think. This is Nerella Suresh, who's from Endurance. And he's asking these questions. How will you manage candidate pre-onboarding experiences virtually for those who are serving 2 months of notice period? In a market like India, we often have organizations that also have 3 months notice period. So I think it's a very valid question. And I'd love to see, if you have any thoughts on that, Sudeep or Manmeet.
Well, let me take a stab at this. I mean, I don't think this is true only right now. Even earlier, this has always been a reality. And the fact is that with the notice periods in India ranging from 1 to 3 months, and many of them being 3 months, the gestation period is fairly long. And I think all recruiters on this call will agree that the need to track, the candidate's experience during that period, to have engagement consistently, and to ensure that the decline percentages are kept under control is a reality. So I don't think it's true right now. What we are definitely seeing, and I would love to hear, if Manmeet agrees with me, is some interesting trends around this as well. Because, the organizations right now across India are also responding to this very differently. So there are places where our candidates and people who've been selected are coming back to us and asking us for more time. There are also places where they are coming back to us and telling us that they can join much earlier, because there are trends within our different organizations on how things are going. So it's kind of unusual, and I think we have to equip our talent acquisition teams to respond appropriately. But having said that, going back to that core question, you have to maintain the same post-offer engagement process that you did earlier. Probably intensify that a little bit, and probably layer it with, I think, a little bit of compassion as well, because people are stuck in very different situations. There are people who are stuck in different cities, for example, and they're unable to go back to the work locations. So you have to be a little more agile and to be able to respond to slightly different situations that will keep coming up with the current scenario. Manmeet, I would love to hear about what you're experiencing and if you're experiencing the changes that I just spoke about.
No, I think you said it very, very well, Sudeep. The thing for us, I think, has really been that there is a lot more, people are also very worried. You might have given them an offer, in February, and now it's kind of getting closer for them to join, and they are a lot more worried about, are things going to work out, or am I taking the right decision moving companies when things are so unstable? So to your point about being more compassionate and being more empathetic towards what they might be feeling and what risks that they might be perceiving. The onboarding process goes a long way in managing that, having those that rhythm around the pre-onboarding, regular conversations, both with the recruiter as well as the hiring manager from time to time, do help quite a bit. But I think your point about the compassion really resonates. I do think that's the thing that makes a big difference in how we need to be and how we do sort of manage this process in these current strange times.
Completely agree there, Manmeet and Sudeep. Manmeet, your point about compassion, I think it makes so much sense where, all of us in today's world are just going after, achieving quotas or going ahead and executing and taking our products live and shipping updates after updates after updates. And along with what Sudeep said, agility is the name of the game. And it's very important for all of us to have agile processes, systems, and people capabilities. Now, with that, let me go to one more bonus question that I had, because I saw 3-4 questions that came along similar lines on this question that we had time. So let me take that question and ask this to both of you, Sudeep and Manmeet. And Manmeet, maybe we can go with you first. How do recruiters go about ensuring that both hiring managers and candidates always receive a 5-star hiring or candidate experience? How can we ensure that both of the talent organization customers are really, really happy? So let's start with you, Manmeet, if that's okay.
Sure. It's, I really do feel that recruiters right now are possibly in a pretty tough spot. They have a bunch of challenges to manage both sides, both from all of the demands that come to them from the hiring managers and the broader interviewing community that they have to manage, as well as what the candidate is sort of focused on. I think 2 aspects of this. From a candidate perspective, invariably, the more information and context that can be provided, the more customized and personalized the experience can be for them. The more visibility they have to how the system is working, the higher it is the likelihood of being able to keep their trust. PhonePe, the recruitment process really just focuses a lot on that aspect of it, on from the time that we first reach out to the candidate, how do we ensure that they're getting constant updates on, hey, this is the stage that you're in, this is what has happened, this is what will happen next, this is the entire process that we follow, these are the constraints that are coming in right now. Yes, now we have clarity on which team you're going to be with, so we'll be setting up this conversation with the hiring manager. So I think from a candidate perspective, it's a fairly intensive process, but it is, I think, in a lot of ways easier to manage, because it's largely around making sure that you're keeping a personalized approach to the engagement that you have with them. On the hiring manager, or the interviewer side, I think it gets a little bit more complex, because on the one hand, recruiters have to deal with people coming to them with when are you going to close my positions? And on the other hand, you have all the rest of those challenges of making sure that the interviewer is as focused on giving the candidate a great experience as the hiring manager might be, or as the recruiter might be. There, I think in both of those cases, a bunch of things that we have spoken about, keeping the interviewers prepared, making sure that the process is standardized and systematic, that they are evaluating against the same set of criteria, helps give the interviewers and the hiring managers also a lot more confidence in us understanding their needs very well and being very equipped to solve for those needs. the process is not random, the needs are not random, we can much more effectively pinpoint where the problem is and work to address it. And so therefore, it might take time, we might take a little while to find the candidates that we really want, but there is a lot of transparency and a lot of data available to know what you need to solve for and how, and that from a hiring manager perspective or an interviewer perspective helps a huge amount in making sure that people are immediately bought in and aligned to all of the efforts that the recruiters want them to be taking. Sudeep, would love to hear your inputs on this as well.
No, I agree. I mean, we just need to be holistic about it on both ends. I think we have been fairly fortunate to have, a set of our tech leaders and managers being very patient and accommodative during this period. And I think, like we discussed earlier, culture is not restrictive, right? I mean, whatever is internal, whatever is your culture internally, if you do have a culture of respect and inclusivity, etc., it kind of translates into your hiring process as well. So I think our hiring managers have demonstrated that consistently. I would like to think that our talent acquisition team has also responded and been able to familiarize them, enable them, support them during this period. I mean, there were glitches at the start, right? I mean, even as we switched to a remote hiring process and we wanted to continue the momentum on hiring, there were often enough glitches which caused a dip in both the candidate experience and the hiring manager experience. But I think it's not about the glitches. It's about how you respond to that. How do you deal with the issues? How do you deal with the fact that the hiring manager is sometimes frustrated and not able to get the numbers on time, or the candidate experience who's worried about their job, he or she gets frustrated as well. And we've been able to sort of counter that and still maintain a reasonably positive experience. So I think the personal connect bit, I would keep re-emphasizing that, is very, very important during this period, right? You can have the best tools and the technology in the system, but if you're not supplementing it with the genuine respect and relationships, then that's not going to work. That's how I would think.
Oh, very well said, Sudeep. I think the one thing that I've learned is relationships matter. And so long as you're able to build meaningful relationships that will last, you will always do well in all aspects of business and life. So I think excellent point that you shared. I also kind of wanted to share that, history has consistently shown us that talent continues to be the core differentiator when it comes to running any successful business. And in the words of Mark Benoit, acquiring the right talent is the most important key to growth. Hiring always was and still is the most important thing that we do, is what he says. Therefore, important for all of us to, keep the lights on, keep interacting with talent and the broader candidate community for the benefit of our companies, keep engaging with them, and just be honest with them in terms of whether there are opportunities or there aren't opportunities. And we can communicate honestly and build meaningful relationships. And I think you'll always create what we call moments that matter. So thanks, Sudeep and Manmeet, both for sharing that perspective. I also wanted to share this slide because a couple of people from the audience actually asked this question, saying that, what do recruiters do to stay motivated during times of COVID? I think it's a momentary phase that we're all going through, but like Mark Benoit says, always keep the lights on, keep interacting with your community, because you never know how the business outlook and scenario changes, so that you can then attack as soon as you've got guidance from firms. I think we've got time for just one more last question. So let's go to this one that comes from Harsha from Cognizant. And Harsha has an interesting one that he states, saying that an evident hurdle that most of us face today in assessing talent remotely is a lack of stable infrastructure, especially at the candidate's end. As you know, many times individuals are grappling with stuff like internet connectivity, audio blocks in and out. Are there any hacks that you have found so far to address such issues? Any answers to that? Any comments on that, Sudeep, Manmeet?
I don't think there is any universal hack to issues like this. I think what one needs to do is just be mentally prepared and let our hiring managers and so on be also mentally prepared, and then work around it, right? I mean, we've all learned to do that on a work front as well. And I think similarly for interviews. So be patient. One of the things, for example, we realized that we needed to do is invest a lot more in just the coordination. Counterintuitively, we realized that the amount of coordination that we had to do because of issues like this was actually much higher than what we would be doing if we were doing all of this in person. And we actually increased some of our capacity in the talent acquisition team to take care of issues like this. So I think you need to work around it and demonstrate patience on both sides. I mean, at least I'm not aware of any universal tech hacks that we've been able to figure out for solving issues like this. I think this is fairly systemic in India. I don't know if Manmeet, you had a different experience.
No, I would agree with that. The only thing I think is that certain tools, especially when you're looking at things like code pairing and virtual onboarding, certain tools are just built out to be more effective. So they take up less bandwidth. They are smoother to run through. So that is a little bit of a variation that happens. If it's an interview where you're largely assessing the next level cultural elements and are looking at problem solving and stuff like that, you can always switch to just phone mode. So that works. But I think the challenge comes more specifically on the tech rounds where it is around assessing for technical capability and skill sets. And there, I think investing in the right kind of infrastructure from a systemic perspective for when you're looking at code pairing and virtual onboarding, that does sort of make somewhat of a difference. It's like you said, it always remains a challenge and it's continuing to be an issue, but the right systems sort of help a little bit more than the others.
No, completely agree
Yeah,
there,
agree.
Manmeet and Sudeep. A quick hack that I'd like to share, Harsha, since you asked this question, and to all of our audience, is that people like me are always paranoid. And it's not really about interviews, but it's about most important meetings. Like, for example, we're hosting this webinar. More than 300 of you have turned up today. So what I did was, although I have my broadband connection, but just in case it went down, I went to my neighbor and got the password for their broadband connection just for today, for this particular meeting. In case, God forbid, my network goes down, I at least have a backup. The other thing that I always do is, and this can be done by most people, is that, have a small UPS at home. This UPS will typically cost you 1,500 rupees in India. But what it does is when power goes out and your router reboots, you will lose connection for about 5 minutes, right, till it reboots. Having this 1,500 rupees router in your house will ensure that the router doesn't reboot and you have stable connectivity. So these are two quick hacks that I've learned over time, ever since, COVID-19 started, to make sure that my effectives are really, really more effective. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap on our webinar for today. I wanted to wrap up this webinar by really sharing that our next webinar is scheduled for the 28th of May, which is next week, on a very exciting theme called Virtual Whiteboarding and Beyond. Please join us as Dan, Rahul, and Gaurav from the HackerRank team share how you can define a standard skill rubric to all interviewers focused on the right skills, and how companies can assess advanced system design skills on our virtual whiteboard. We'll shortly send you an email about this as well, so that you can register along with the deck of this session shortly. We're also doing a masterclass in June with Jaleel, who is Adobe India CHRO, and Madhuri Lal, who is the managing director of Deutsche Bank, and we will also send you an email with these details so that you can join us that session in June as well. A big thanks to Sudeep and Manmeet for joining us for this session. I'd really also like to thank Melanie, who's our producer for this session and helped us put this together, along with my colleagues Ala Oaks and Melissa Ehjaj. Big thanks to Dennis from the On24 platform team, who's been with us, and he's helping answer a lot of your queries to most of you today. Thank you everyone for tuning in, particularly Sudeep and Manmeet, for a fantastic masterclass. I hope you all enjoyed this webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, Adu. Great to be here. Thanks. Bye, Manmeet.
Bye. Bye, Steve.
Bye, all.